just a little bit about what this is all about. I'm on here every day this week, Monday through Friday. Friday, I haven't decided if I'm going to come on extra early or later, just because it's going to be a little busy. I have a client, and then I have a friend coming to town, and we have some things going on. So, but I'll be here every day just talking about the ways that you can become sexually free. So if you feel like you are not as open sexually as you would like to be, or you just feel like your sex life isn't quite where you want it to be, or even just your interest in sex. I know I work with a lot of people, and I've had a lot of people send me messages that struggle because they feel like their libido is low, or they just don't have a sex drive. And so I work a lot with people that struggle with that, just to help them understand that there are different things that impact our sex drive. And so it may not be so much to like, oh, I was just born this way. It just may be that you are more sensitive to things that kind of get rid of or slow down your sex drive, whereas other people might be more sensitive to things that impact and make them more excited. So this is all about just finding ways to kind of open up sexually, and even opening up to what you like, what you don't like, things like that. And so then you can communicate that, of course, with the people that you choose to have sex with, or just to enjoy by yourself. So that is up to you completely. So today is day 2. Like I said, day 1 was to excite your sensation. So we talked all about different ways that you can do that. Today is all about exciting your mind, right? So after you've kind of figured out what feels good to you, I think it's important to recognize that there are other ways to kind of get you in the mood. There are other things that you can do that can really help you understand more about, like, okay, when I get certain things in my mind or in my brain, how does that impact how I come across sexually? So it's two. I'm focusing on 2 different areas. One is the education part, and the other one is the excitement, exploration part. So I'm gonna start with the education part. So basically, when it comes to that side of it, it's more about if you feel like you don't have the confidence when it comes to sex or your sexuality, if you feel like you sometimes are not sure what to do or what's expected and things like that, I'm really big on educating yourself, and not just educating yourself through porn or anything like that. We're going to get to the porn, but I think it's important to kind of understand what happens to your body when you are aroused, what happens to your body when you are having sex and things like that. I think that's very important. And we focus so much on just like, oh, it just happens, it should come naturally. But sometimes that impacts us because we're just not sure, like, is this normal? Is this not normal? That type of stuff. So I think education and learning a little bit more about sex and how it impacts you, how different people handle sex, it will help you kind of understand what's okay, what's not okay, when should you seek help, all of those things. Along with that, even outside of like just learning about sex in general, right? Because I know most of us have had sex ed, but a lot of us, especially us that live in the South, I know we've talked about that on the show before, we may not have had the best sex education. So it's up to us to pick up the ball and go. Like, it's up to us to really look into like, okay, what don't I know? What don't I understand about the male and female anatomy? And really getting down to like, do I really know as much as I should for someone who's out here having sex, right? So that's number 1. And then along with that, I think it's okay to look up like tips and tricks and how do I do this? If you don't feel comfortable, or if you hate oral sex, then maybe you should do a little bit more research on that, right? Because sometimes that hate for that particular act comes from the fact that I'm not confident in my skills. I don't think I know what I'm doing, or it doesn't ever turn out the way I want it to. But if you work on that, and if you do a little bit more research on it, you'd be surprised like how much, once you have that knowledge and start to apply that knowledge and get the reaction that you're seeking, how much you might start to enjoy it. And that goes across the board with all sexual activities, all intimate activities. And so I think it's important to do both research, just so you can have the awareness and the knowledge when it comes to the biology of sex, the biology of humans, how things work, how they're organized. I think all of that is important. But I also think it's important to look up tips and look up, well, how-tos and what's important and what do people say. And then, of course, if you have a partner, it's very important to talk to your partner about that as well. So that's part of the exciting your mind, right, is that education piece. The other part of it is, how can I get in the mood? What things can I do to make me feel more sexual? And so that goes into what we talked about yesterday. But today, again, when we're talking about exciting your mind, I'm thinking about different ways that you can explore sexuality without actually participating in it that can be helpful. So the number one thing, well, not the number one, I have 3 different tips, 3 different ways, which are pretty I won't say basic, but people just don't think about it, and I don't think they understand like how much this can help. The first one is reading erotic literature or reading anything like that. If you, I know when I was younger, there was Eric Jerome Dickey, there was Zane, there was, I believe his name was Michael Harris. He ended up passing away. So there were all these, I don't think it was Elin Harris is his name, Elin Harris. So there were all these people writing these erotic literature that was like a story, right? Like these love stories, romance, not so romantic, whatever stories, but that it incorporated the sex. And so it felt not so like harsh or it felt a little safer than just watching porn, right? And especially if you are a reader and you know the benefits of reading and allowing your mind to go wherever you want it to go and being able to visualize all those things that happen within those books, I think it's important to be able to do that when it comes to the sex side as well. So that's one thing, is that, if it's something that you used to do, if you've never done it, like pick up a book, or even, Google is everything, right? So Google erotic stories or things like that, and find things that you like and figure out which ones do I really enjoy and which ones I'm not such a fan of. And again, as I go through each of these, I want to be clear that like just because something is of interest to you, just because something might even turn you on, that does not mean that that's something that you want to do in your real life. But I think it's important to recognize what those things are. And again, you can use that as a way, like if I'm having a rough day and now I figured out what senses I need to kind of engage in order to calm down and be kind of more in the mood, maybe this is step 2 is, let me read a short story online and get me more in the mood and get me feeling more sexual and things like that, right? So that's one. Another one is podcast. So obviously I'm a huge fan of podcasts. I have Room for Relations podcast. I also have a mental health podcast that I do with my other business. And so I love podcasts. And I recently discovered a podcast that actually is a Black erotic podcast. And that is just having an erotic podcast in general, I haven't seen much of that, but this one is solely based on Black characters, which is completely amazing. It's called Black Widow. And by the way, I'm going to have links to all of this stuff in the email. So again, go to roomforrelations.com, sign up for the email, and I'll have all that information so you can go ahead and just click and listen to the podcast or a couple of books that I, would suggest if you're looking for some literature. Okay. So yeah, hey, so that is the second thing, is just podcast. So podcast, and it doesn't have to be, again, that can go into the education piece. There are a lot of podcasts about relationships and sex that are more about education, that are more about helping you understand, more conversations. And then, like I said, the one I specifically mentioned is more storytelling, but it goes into that erotic side. So it just depends on what you're looking for. If you feel like, you don't feel as confident, then I might go to the more conversation, people giving tips, people explaining like their situations. I know a lot on the Room for Relations podcast, we talk a lot about our own experiences. And even on the one that we have up right now, which is called Do You Even Like Sex, I think is the name of it. But even on that one, we talk a lot about, we have a conversation about how we came to the point that we are in, where we feel more open about having these conversations. Because not everybody is there, and not everybody grows up in those environments. And so sometimes listening to other people and their experiences and the things that they went through can really help you kind of figure out, okay, so maybe this is why I'm the way I am, or maybe this is why I struggle. So then what do I need to do to get out of that? So podcasts are a great resource, whatever lane or area, whichever area you feel like you struggle in. It's a great way to kind of get into that, being able to listen to people talk about sex. Again, just like with the reading, figuring out, that's interesting, I've never heard of that, let me explore more into that. It gives you more information, and the more information you have, the less scary it is, and the less okay, this is something that's supposed to be private and we only do in our bedroom and nobody should know about it, we should never talk about it. Because if everybody was that way, I think a lot of people would not be enjoying their sex life as much as they can. So listening to other people kind of talk about it, or listening to those erotic stories on Black Widow podcast might help. The third thing, where is it? Oh, it's IG, social media in general. And actually, again, if you sign up for the email, then I'll put that in there. But on IG, there are a lot of links, like a lot of pages and hashtags that you can go to that have like black art or erotic noir, whatever it's called, like the pictures and the cartoons and things like that. Again, this is just another way to kind of like engage your mind in a different type of way. It's not necessarily supposed to be like a replacement for porn. I mean, it can be. I know a lot of people used to use Tumblr instead of going to Pornhub because it was a little less aggressive than Pornhub or any of those other porn sites. But it is very important to be able to see sex in different lights, and sometimes the pictures are a little bit more romantic, sometimes they're a little more aggressive. It just depends, but that might be something to explore, again, to kind of figure out like what gets me going, what am I interested in, what do I like, what makes me excited about watching these. So some of the hashtags is black erotica art. Two of the pages that I like are Benny Rose. I've actually featured him on Room for Relations Instagram at some point down there, and then Deep.erotica. Both of those have good pictures. I'm sure there are plenty of other ones, but those are the two that I'm familiar with. So check it out if you are trying to find a kind of ease your way into the whole like erotica, or like seeing how that impacts you. Check out the pictures. You know, that might be a good place to start. And then of course the last one is just porn. I say again, if that's something that's a little bit too aggressive, more softcore, you know, of course all the cable channels, the premium channels tend to have some type of softcore porn on there. I'm sure you can find some of that online as well. But it's okay. It is about just kind of like what excites you, what turns you on, what mentally gets you started and makes you start thinking about sex and feeling a little bit more open. And so those are the ways that I think you can really explore that and really excite your mind, and really look into like, okay, so what am I interested in? What, after I've kind of figured out what I like as far as like touch and smell and scent, like what will really get me in the mood to feel like, okay, like I feel comfortable with this. I feel comfortable exploring, that type of stuff. So that is day 2. The tip for day 2 is to excite your mind and find different ways to do that. My challenge every day is for you to try it. Like, I want you to try something, whether that's, going on to the internet and reading some erotic short stories, or if it's, looking up the podcast, listening to that. Try something a little different. Like, the goal is always like to challenge yourself and try something that you wouldn't normally try, just because you'll be surprised like how engaged you are. And one thing I will say is it's good to know what you like and what you don't like. So if something comes up and you're like, no, that's not for me, now you know, as opposed to being in the middle of something and then somebody brings it up and it's like, well, I don't know, so let's see, So I think all of this is about you kind of figuring out what works for you and what doesn't. So yeah, so make sure that you try one of these things. So we can either read book, short stories, whatever, podcast, whether it's educational or whether it is more of the erotica, or the tips and tricks. Look at the IG pages or look at some type of social media that can give you some information, as well as if you are interested in going to like softcore porn or hardcore porn or any type of porn that you're interested in. So that is the way to kind of excite your mind when it comes to becoming sexually free. Okay, so thank you guys so much for watching. Like I said, I'm going